So, Jervis, welcome to Chasing the Dream. Thanks for coming on this little workplace culture podcast.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I'm looking forward to it, Ethan.
Our pleasure. So, I want to dive right in. During the intro, I mentioned something that you were kind enough to share with me in some of your background information that 5 years ago you had this, I call it an epiphany, is the way I picture you kind of describing the realization that what you had done before helping people gain financial strength was kind of led you, I don't want to say crossroads, but can you talk a little bit more about that chapter of your life and what led to ProsperBridge?
Yeah, it started quite a bit longer ago than that. So in 2007, I got into finance. And that was, I'm one of those very strange humans, Ethan, that always wanted to be in finance. So probably because my dad was in the mortgage industry and my stepdad was a financial advisor. And so in 2007, after sort of trying some other careers post college, I got into finance, got into real estate securities, did very well very quickly, took to it like a fish to water, loved it. And then in 2009, my whole life fell apart. I lost my marriage. My wife left me. My income was down 80%. Remember, I was in real estate securities. wasn't a really hot sector in 2009. My dad died, and by February of 2010, I'd lost my house to the foreclosure process. So what that very brief period taught me, and by the way, I recovered very quickly. I wrote a business plan, got some funding from friends and family, and started my own financial services practice that blossomed over time. But what that period taught me was that we have maybe the best system in the world when things are good, when you've got extra cash, when you have the opportunity to invest, to purchase insurance. You can get wealthier just sitting at home doing nothing. But flip side of that coin is when you're struggling, the system absolutely preys on you. And that planted seeds that many years later, to your point, led me to a deep feeling of dissatisfaction with my work. I was making more money at doing better than I had ever done in financial services and finding myself less and less fulfilled. But I was loving the pro bono work I was doing for some folks that were struggling to make ends meet, going through bankruptcy or just trying to figure out how to deal with disabilities or job losses. That filled my cup. And so in 2019, myself and some friends left the Fortune 50 financial services company we were at and started what would become ProsperBridge, which is really just an ecosystem that we have built to give everyone a chance at financial stability. And if we can work with them long enough, hopefully a chance at getting into those prosperity cycles that I help the top 10% execute as a financial planner.
Yeah, I guess two thoughts. First is thank you so much for being extremely transparent and upfront about what some of the background factors were that you navigated through. And I guess I find it fascinating when somebody in your position, financially you recover, you navigate through the storm, you're financially at a point in your career where you're at least monetarily you're succeeding on all levels, and all of a sudden the realization that that's not satisfying you, and that you identify that the pro bono work is where you found satisfaction. I guess my fascination is when you launch this thing called ProsperBridge, how do you kind of get the message out to people that there's a different way of being financially, I guess, safe? How do you kind of convey that to people wherever they are at their stage of their careers?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's a very tough one to answer. I'm not sure I have a good answer for that yet, because the work that we do, no one else is doing. And that to me is a real tragedy. Fortunately, what we recognized as we were putting this concept together is that there's a really important stakeholder here, and that's employers. So this problem of people struggling to have more money than month really has had a huge impact on employment. And what has happened is that basically the value of your paycheck, the numbers may be going up, but the value of your paycheck is decreasing. So the gap between what you are able to get from your paycheck and what you need or want is getting wider. And a good example of that, if anybody wants to embark on some research, would be to look at the price to income ratios for purchasing a home. We have a whole generation now, Generation Z, that doesn't feel like homeownership is a realistic or attainable goal for the vast majority of those folks. What that means for employers is that, hey, going to work every day now no longer empowers your employees to buy a home. So that's a huge chunk of value that a paycheck used to provide that it no longer does. And for you as an employer, you have to find ways to increase the value of that paycheck to make up for that lost value. And the same thing applies to education costs, to healthcare costs, even to food costs in the last few years. You're just seeing the value of a paycheck shrink faster than employers can raise wages.
Yeah, this is, again, everything that when you and I talk is so fascinating to me, because the things that you say have come up in conversations that I've had hundreds of times. And for example, a number of conversations with people who are older, Gen Zs and millennials, the fallacy of home ownership. Like they're priced out of markets because of, for example, all those homes being acquired for purposes of, Airbnbs and rental and all that stuff. But I guess my fascination also with the model that you've created is the value of the paycheck. How receptive are organizations to have conversations with you about the rising cost in healthcare? And so many people who work in companies are primary care providers for a sick loved one. And how do you kind of encourage organizations that may not be inclined to care about the value of the paycheck they're giving to their people? Because a lot of organizations I talk to, when I talk to them about creating caring organizations, they basically say our caring is we give people a paycheck every week or every other week. That's it. That's the extent of the relationship. How do you encourage people in organizations to rethink the notion of the value of a paycheck in terms of the power for their people?
That's a great question. There's some fights that I'm not really interested in having. And when we meet with leaders who don't feel that it's their responsibility to invest in their people in meaningful ways, to empower their people to meaningful, purposeful outcomes in their lives, not just at work, that's probably not a leader that we want to work with. So I don't try to change people's minds or hearts. What I do is I share data. Now, the reality is that most of the clients that we work with are blue collar and nonprofit organizations. And what they have already learned is that they don't have a choice, right? Even if their hearts are black as night and all they care about is dollars, what they're finding is that they cannot attract and retain talent. You've got companies like FedEx and Amazon that literally cannot hire enough people to perform the services that there's a demand for in the market. And so these companies are realizing we have to do something to fix this problem. It's great to talk about purpose. It's great to talk about culture. It's great to talk about, well-being. Okay, those are all really important things that I believe are essential parts of work. However, the number one reason people are quitting or leaving is still because they believe they can get a better or access to a better financial life with another opportunity. And if you can't fix that problem, you're not going to have a workforce, let alone a good workforce. You're not going to have a workforce substantial enough to meet the demand for your product or service. And the data is overwhelmingly saying that. And we see that at the top of the wage scale too. It's a different fight. It's a different feel, but you see Apple, you see Google, you see high-priced jobs at Amazon. You see these companies fighting each other for the same talent. And you see people leaving for relatively small wage increases just because they perceive that those dollars are going to have a big impact on their life. And so this really isn't good for anybody. The increased turnover, the reduced loyalty. I mean, raise your hand if you like changing jobs. I think the only thing that comes to mind immediately that is worse than changing jobs is moving. It's not very fun. Usually, sometimes it is, but usually it's not very fun, and it's certainly not efficient for anyone.
If an organization is predisposed to want to ask you how you can advise them to kind of think through this notion of the power of a paycheck and making an attractive, equitable offering for their people. I guess I want to use Amazon or FedEx as the model, right? So like you're saying, people move for relatively small incremental increases in compensation, but a place like UPS has been for a period of time extremely successful in setting the market in terms of compensation, benefits, and honestly, there's no comparison right now when I look at benefits and all that, but UPS and let's say FedEx. So my question is, what is the framework or the methodology that you employ at ProsperBridge to have those conversations with organizations to say, people are probably not leaving you just because of, let's say, the salary, but there's a number of things that kind of come into that. How do you navigate organizations through that conversation?
That's a great question. What if I could give you a raise without paying you more? Does that sound pretty good?
I'm intrigued.
Yeah, exactly. So the good news is, I've shared a lot of bad news. The good news is that there are a lot of systems out there that are already in place and more that are being built every day to help deal with some of these challenges. Okay, so you as an employer have a tremendous opportunity. You might say, because you have the opportunity, you have the responsibility to fix some of these problems, to make paychecks more impactful and more equitable. Okay, so you can go about doing that. You can give your people a raise without paying them more if you so choose, because there are all of these value levers out there that you just have to help your people properly navigate, and they can effectively have more dollars in their pocket. So if I said I was going to give you $1 million, you might be really excited. However, what I didn't tell you is that I'm actually going to give you that $1 million from an African country where that is virtually worthless. Okay, so my point is, in saying that, is that the numbers are what we have become obsessed with. Employers are obsessed with that, right? Like you said, UPS sets the compensation market. So let's say the base pay for a UPS driver is $21 an hour, and I have no idea what it is, but I'm just making that number up. That's just a number. Okay, ultimately what matters is what each individual is able to take with that $21 and convert it into. All right, so I am a Gen Xer, and my generation is very guilty of being mercenaries. Okay, we will generally go from job to job for whoever is going to give us the best paycheck. And that's because we realized at a young age, growing up in the 80s, that if you give us access to more resources, we can take those resources and turn them into a better life. That's gotten harder and harder over the last 20 years, especially. And so now it's not just about the resources you have, it's about how efficiently you take those resources and allocate them. And so if let's use a very what for you and I is a very basic example, and for a lot of people is not, a dependent care flexible spending account. Okay, so FSAs and HSAs are huge value opportunities for employees. Do you know who predominantly uses FSAs and HSAs? High-income white males. Okay, now there's nothing fundamentally wrong with that, except
right.
That,
it's not. We're assuming that's not a value judgment. Right.
Yeah. But except that the people that need the value the most from those tools are getting it the least. Okay.
And why is that? Whose responsibility is that? The employee to do the research, or the organization to educate their people?
I'm going to answer. I'm going to come back to answering that question in a second. Okay. Because the real answer is it doesn't matter. All right. If you're an employer, you can argue about how people have gotten less financially responsible, how they're not doing enough research on their own. You know, you can complain about that stuff as long as I pay my people well, I give them good benefits. It's their problem. Well, guess what? It's not their problem. It's your problem. Because if they can't make ends meet, they're going to leave your company, or they're going to be a disengaged employee, or they're going to steal from your company, or they're many times more likely to have an accident at work. It is your problem. Okay. And employers that don't get that are not employers that I want to work with. If you do get it, then you can start to say, regardless of what your motivator is, whether it's heart or head, then you can start to say, okay, how do I fix this problem? Okay. And that's the important thing. The important thing is not whose fault is this. It's not laying blame. It's how do we fix the problem? And you fix the problem by giving people access to guidance and navigation that's going to help them unlock the potential of their paycheck. Okay. So if I pay you $50,000 and I pay someone else $60,000, but I give you a navigator who helps you unlock the full potential of that 50 grand, you could likely turn that into a better life than the person making 60K. Okay, because you have someone helping you navigate the system. So you're no longer overpaying for things like home and auto insurance, your cell phone, your internet. You're using all of the benefits at work that are going to add value to your life at little or no cost to you. You are, where I live, okay, a family of 4 making $75,000 is eligible for state child care assistance. You may be eligible for government benefits for literally free money that you didn't know you were entitled to because you think you're making a decent wage. Okay, so how do we find all the free money? All of us, to some degree, are leaving money in the couch cushions. Okay,
I have to jump in because I still, based on the number of conversations we've had, I still don't understand, Jervis, where ProsperBridge fits into that equation of the kind of shared responsibility of education between employee and employer.
Yeah, well, the most valuable resource that employers have that they don't understand is their employees' time.
Say that again?
The most valuable resource that employers have that they don't fully understand the potential of is their employees' time. The one thing that all employers share in common is that they own their employees' time. If they allocate a very small percentage of that time, I'm talking a tiny percentage of that time, and in the case of our service, we're talking about less than 1/3 of 1%, they can change these stories dramatically. So what we do is for 30 minutes a month, which is less than 1/3 of 1% of an employee's hours, if you're looking at a 40-hour work week, okay, the employee meets with a navigator who helps them do exactly what I just shared with you, helps them find all those free money opportunities that they're currently missing and harvest those opportunities, which effectively increases the value of their paycheck. That 30 minutes happens on the clock, okay, and is paid for by the service is paid for by the employer. So now an employer is saying work is where you come to access financial well-being. It's not just where you come to get a paycheck. It's where you come to turn that paycheck into the outcomes that you want and need. And you can apply that, by the way, not just to financial well-being, but also to physical health. So you mentioned primary care, okay? There's a movement towards investing in people. McKinsey, Deloitte, Baird, the largest consulting firms in the country are investing billions with a B of dollars into human capital strategies. You and I were just talking about irrational capital before this as well. One of the biggest inefficiencies we have in our market right now is the way we treat people. And companies are realizing that. And the companies that will win the next decade are the ones that are going to be on the front end of that curve instead of the back end of that curve. So if you took, in my opinion, if you took 1%, actually less than 1% of your employees' time, and you allocated that to well-being activities that you knew were going to drive results, like offering direct primary care. So not just offering it, but then giving your people time on the clock to either have a virtual or in-person primary care visit. That preventive care visit, which most people, especially people that are financially stressed, do not take, is the single biggest thing you can do to reduce your own healthcare spend and improve the well-being of your workforce. This is a no-brainer, Ethan. Why we're not already doing this is beyond me, The only answer is that we've never done it before.
Right. And you and I talked about that, but for benefit of the audience listening in, that's part of when you and I talked about the fundamental shift in the 20th to the 21st century organization, the shifting dynamic of what the role of the employer is. And I keep getting back to what you were saying before about ProsperBridge serving this kind of role in the relationship that the client who brings you in has with them and their people. It's a hard differentiator now, meaning the organization that brings you in is saying to their people, not only are we going to pay you, compensate you for your contributions, we're going to take this relationship a step further. We're going to share ProsperBridge. We're going to bring ProsperBridge in to enable you to better understand how to gain control over your financials and also put into practice really strong discipline on not just getting a paycheck, but carving out financial. That's a talent retention. That's a top talent retention differentiator, no?
Oh, 100%. And that's why we're seeing an increase in interest from white collar companies. So the majority of our clients, as we've kicked off here, and we're just a couple of years into our current offering. So we started with our beta client in November of 2020.
Yeah.
That taught us a lot of really important lessons that I don't have time to go into right now, but we got funding and launched officially as a public benefit corporation in February of 2022 and went to market in fall of 2022. So most of our first clients have been companies that are desperate to attract and retain talent because they simply cannot. It is such a big problem for them that they're having trouble operating. Okay, now
Right.
we're seeing more companies that want to be employers of choice interested in our services and becoming clients, because while the conversation that you and I are having, I know for most people makes them immediately think of frontline employees or low and middle income employees, the reality is that the more money you make, the more money you probably waste. And so any employer that wants to improve their employees' financial picture can offer a service like this and differentiate themselves from everybody else. Because really, what you just said is very true, that we help people with discipline, we help people achieve better outcomes. But what we say to employees to get them interested in our service is, we are going to put more money in your pocket. And that's what we do. The first thing we measure, in fact, we guarantee that for an employer, for every dollar they spend on us, we're going to put $5 in their employees' pockets. Okay, so if you said to me, what should I ask myself about my company to know whether or not I'm doing a good job taking care of my people financially? And by the way, this is a great stat that has changed dramatically in the last 10 years. So 10 years ago, less than 40% of employers believed they were responsible for their employees' financial well-being. Okay, in 2014, basically no employer thought that their job was to better their employees' financial picture. Their job was to pay them, right, to offer competitive benefits, and then the employee's job. Do you know what that statistic was as of last year? How many? 96%.
That blows my mind. That blows my mind that there's been that pronounced a mindset shift, a transformation in the employer's understanding of what their role is in partnership with their people. I don't agree with it, but I'm sure it's accurate because that's where the data lies. Right.
Yeah, and employees feel the same way, right? 10 years ago, employees weren't sure that their employers were responsible for their financial well-being. Today, they are. Okay, so we have to start drawing straight lines from work to well-being. And you can't do that by just putting numbers on a paycheck. So the three things that you should be measuring to answer the question, am I doing a good job in the area of well-being, is number one, cash flow, right? So PayPal has already started this movement of net disposable income. They want to get all their employees to 20% net disposable income, okay? So at the end of the month, 20% of the paycheck is left over to spend on things you want to spend it on. They haven't gotten there yet, but they're working hard. That came from Dan Schulman, the former CEO of PayPal, going out to his car one night and seeing one of his employees who was paid well, or so he thought. This employee was making $75,000 a year, sleeping in his car. And that pulled on Dan's conscience enough to ask himself the question, oh my gosh, how many other people is this happening to in the company? And it turns out a lot. Okay, so number one is net disposable income. After I pay for everything I need, what do I have left over? Number two is your debt to income ratio. If your employees have bad debt and you don't help them fix that problem, or that problem doesn't get fixed, they are going to be trapped in permanent scarcity cycles. They will never escape. And that's how the system wants it, by the way. So you and I profit the system by buying investments in insurance. For most Americans, almost 70% of Americans, they profit the financial system by accessing bad debt over and over again. Okay, so it's this cycle of I have a financial need, okay, or maybe even it's a financial want, a big financial want. I don't have the cash to meet that objective, so I use a credit card or some other high interest tool in order to meet it, and then I pay that down. Maybe even I pay it off, but then something happens. I get a flat tire, my hot water heater breaks, my kids break their leg playing soccer. And all of a sudden, I have to go right back to that high interest debt.
It's a perpetual vicious cycle.
It's a perpetual vicious cycle. So if you can't get your employees out of that cycle, then you're never going to empower financial well-being for them. And then the third one is their savings rate, because that's the best predictor of future success. And the way your people feel about their financial future has the biggest impact on their mental health around financial well-being today. So that's why you should care about that. So if your people are saving money, they're going to feel better about their financial future. And that is the factor that's most likely to make them a happier, more engaged employee. Okay. The cash flow issue is the one that's most likely to cause them to leave, but the savings rate is the one that's most likely to cause them to be a great employee. So those are the three things that employers ought to be measuring. And here's the crazy thing, Ethan. In Europe, they're starting to do this.
Yeah.
They are requiring employers to report. This went into law last year, and in January of next year, they're requiring employers to report not just what you're doing for your employees, so not just to say we're offering a financial literacy program, but to report on the impact, the dollars impact of the financial well-being programs you're putting in place. That's going to come across the pond. I don't know when, but again, better to be ahead of the curve than behind it.
And how do you bridge the divide as an employer of choice in American business and industry? You reach out to ProsperBridge.
Yeah, and it's not just us, by the way. So at our core, what we are is a resource connector, right? So I'm going to look at your paycheck as an employer, and I'm going to say, this is great, or maybe it's not, but it probably is. You're offering a lot of benefits and opportunity for value. And this happens all the time. We talk to CFOs, and they'll say, I'm so frustrated that 30% of my employees, for example, aren't putting anything into retirement. I'm offering them free money. Why aren't they taking it? Okay, well, if you can't afford to buy milk, even if your employer is giving you free money, you don't perceive that you have the opportunity or the ability to set money aside for retirement. You can't think about what's going to happen when you're 65, when you're 28, and you can't buy enough food to feed your family, or you can't pay your electric bill. However, to my point about how things are changing, Secure Act 2.0 made it possible for you as an employer to give them the match for them to put money into their 401k that they can pull out up to 4 times a year with no taxes or penalties for financial emergencies. So now any employee, regardless of their financial situation, can participate, but only if you and them have set up the systems and know how to navigate the systems in order to make that a reality. So that's just one example of how we would counsel an employer to make sure you're offering emergency savings accounts in your retirement plan to give your employees that most need that financial help the opportunity at that match that does it in a way that doesn't keep them from taking care of their family needs. The same thing goes for dependent care FSAs, as we've talked about. The same thing goes for HSAs. There are tools out there called health matching accounts where employees can put money into an account. Like if they have a kid they know is going to need braces in 2 years, okay? They put money in 3 years later, an insurance company has doubled that that dollar amount, and then they can use that to buy braces. My point is there's all kinds of tools and resources out there that we can be leveraging that employers don't even necessarily have to add to their benefit suite, although improving your benefit suite is a great way to add value to your people. But that give people real access to meaningful financial progress, and it costs you as an employer nothing but a little bit of time to make sure that you connect them with that resource and they use it.
This goes in so many different directions that are positive, and it's interesting because as I hear you speak, I hear like little things in my head, like word cloud things like employee benefits and 401k and well-being, but this goes the totality of the impact for the employer of choice who goes down this road with ProsperBridge, and also the benefit to their people. There's so many other ancillary benefits, I guess. Before I because we could go on forever, and before I ask you kind of like how people get in touch with you, I am curious, where do you picture ProsperBridge going in 2025? Like what kind of do you envision as you kind of ramp up and roll out in full steam?
Well, this is the Chazin-the-Dream show, so I want to answer that question, with the dream in mind.
Dare to dream big. Dare to dream big.
So my hope, and if it's ProsperBridge, that's great, but I don't particularly care. My hope is that this becomes an expected benefit the same way that people expect major medical right now. I'm not going to work for you if you don't help me turn my paycheck into the outcomes that I want. Okay? I believe, Ethan, that the future is, if we want capitalism to succeed, okay, if we want, maybe a better way to say that is if we want capitalism to heal itself to the point where our economy doesn't disintegrate, okay, then work needs to become the place you go to access well-being. Okay, so right now, if you walk down the street and you say, I need help with investments and insurance, you raise your hand and say that, 10 people are going to run over to you with business cards. They're probably wearing sport coats, okay, and they're going to offer you a business card, and they're gonna set you up with a free meeting, and they're gonna counsel you on the right investments and insurance for your family that also pay them a handsome commission. Okay, but if you're walking down the street right now and you raise your hand and you say, I really need help with cash flow, I can't pay my bills this month, everybody's gonna look at you like you're crazy and walk the other way. Why is that? Why is it that the foundational financial issues that set us up to even have the opportunity to raise our hand and say I need help with investments and insurance are not there's no service out there to help people with those core issues? I don't know, but it's a problem and we need to fix it. And if we don't fix it, this train that's currently off the tracks, unfortunately, and headed for the mountain is going to crash pretty violently. And so, my dream is that this becomes an expectation that when an employee comes into a job interview, they ask questions like, hey, by demographic, tell me about the net disposable income of the folks working here. Okay. By demographic, the debt to income ratio, the savings rate. By the way, I would add to this, and this isn't my wheelhouse, but I would add, what's the burnout rate? How many people feel that the most important relationships in their life are empowered by working here? How many people feel a deep sense of purpose? How many people's physical wellness are improving? So those are the types of questions and the types of things that employers can be measuring, but they're not. Because
as you said, it's starting to happen. It's in the regulatory environment in Europe. You said it's going to cross the pond and get here eventually. You're already kind of having these conversations. You said initially the sweet spot was not for profits and blue collar, but now it's migrating into the white collar space. There's just kind of like a groundswell of receptiveness to the message around ProsperBridge and the sign behind you of putting people above everything.
Yeah. Yep, you got it.
So Jervis, I got to ask you, because I know I'm going to forget. We've covered a lot of ground. We definitely are going to have a follow-up, because what you have to say and what you have to offer in our building is too important. This is too important. This is the tip of the spear of kind of shifting the mindset to, as you kind of alluded to, a more conscious capitalism. How do folks, if they want to have a conversation with you right now, how do folks get in touch with you? What's the best way to reach out and start a conversation with you?
Yeah, thank you. Great question. Best way is email info@prosperbridge.org. That's info@prosperbridge.org. You can also go to our website, which is prosperbridge.org, and you can get in touch with us that way.
Because there's something that I want to wrap up on and then say thank you so much for just really kind of blowing up this concept. Is work is a place where people go, or we reimagine this. The notion of work is a place that people go to achieve well-being. And that's a fundamental rethinking of, I would go to work to be paid a certain amount that then I would need to figure out how to carve that into a sustainable life. And that's my responsibility. And you've completely shifted that conversation.
Yeah, thank you. That's the real objective, Ethan. That's my even bigger picture dream than everybody getting a benefit like ProsperBridge, is that we start to think of work as the place we go to access well-being. Because right now, if we're being honest with ourselves, and the data tells us this, not only is work not that, work is actually the place we go to trade our well-being for a paycheck.
Right.
And that must change.
Well, you and I are doing all we can. I mean, that's what this podcast is about. That's why you've been thinking about this for a very, very long time, and it triggered in you 5 years ago the need to sit down with some folks and figure out a path forward. I just want to take this opportunity again to say thank you for coming on the show and talking about something that I've been doing this for 2 seasons, had like 35 episodes. Nobody's talked about what you're talking about.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate the invite.
And thank you, Jervis. So thank you, everybody, for coming in and checking out Jervis DiCicco talk about ProsperBridge. If you want to follow up with him, all of his contact information is going to be down below in the description. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, but like this, share this. What Jervis has to say is too important not to share. So thank you, Jervis, for coming on the program today.
My pleasure and my honor, Ethan. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.